The floating research station orbited the gas planet like a watchful sentinel, its metal frame gleaming under the distant sun. Inside, the gentle hum of machinery provided a soothing soundtrack to Jules Ren's daily routine. As the station's lead engineer, Jules found comfort in the predictable rhythm of gears, valves, and the occasional beep of diagnostic systems. "Systems check complete, Nora," Jules murmured to the station's AI as he calibrated the atmospheric regulators. "How are the resonance chambers looking for tomorrow's diplomatic exchange?" "All chambers are operating at optimal capacity." "Jules," Nora's disembodied voice replied with a hint of amusement, "though I suspect your anxiety levels might disrupt our readings. Your heart rate has increased by 12% since the announcement of the Nari delegation's arrival." Jules sighed. Nora had been programmed with what the developers called enhanced interpersonal awareness, which often manifested as unwanted psychological observations. "I'm not anxious," Jules countered, adjusting his tool belt. "I'm appropriately concerned about the technical aspects of hosting the first-ever Nari delegation at our station. Their resonance technology is decades beyond ours." "Of course," Nora replied, the AI equivalent of an eye roll embedded in her tone. "Nothing to do with the fact that you haven't spoken to a non-human sentient being in person in over 3 years, and your last date with a human was—" "Override social commentary, code 79. Jules interrupted, though he couldn't help but smile. Nora had become something of a friend during his 2-year assignment on the station, perhaps his only friend, which said more about his social skills than he cared to admit. The truth was, Jules had chosen this assignment precisely because it promised isolation. Earth had become overwhelming with its 17 billion inhabitants crowded into megacities. Here, among the stars, with only 6 other crew members who respected his space, Jules had found peace. The arrival of the Nari delegation threatened to disrupt that carefully constructed tranquility. The Nari were a fascinating species that had made contact with humanity just 7 years ago. Physiologically, they appeared almost human, bipedal, with 2 arms, a head, and similar facial features, but their skin had a subtle iridescent quality that shifted with their emotions, and their eyes were larger, with vertical pupils that expanded in darkness. The most significant difference, however, was their neurological makeup. The Nari possessed what scientists called linguistic resonance, the ability to detect not just spoken words, but the intent and emotional frequency behind them. This made the Nari extraordinary diplomats, but also created significant communication challenges. A carelessly spoken word with conflicting emotional intent could be perceived as a deliberate lie. Casual compliments with genuine feeling behind them could be interpreted as profound declarations. The complexities of human sarcasm had caused several diplomatic incidents during early exchanges. Tomorrow's meeting was centered around cooperative research into this resonance ability. The Nari had agreed to share some of their technology in exchange for human assistance in developing a more nuanced understanding of human emotional frequencies. Jules's engineering expertise was crucial to adapting the station's sensors for the experiments. "Just focus on the technical work," Jules reminded himself as he completed his final checks. "No need for small talk. Commander Harrow will handle the diplomatic side." As he made his way back to his quarters, Jules passed by the observation deck. He paused, drawn to the expansive viewport that showcased the swirling gas giant below. The planet's atmosphere churned in spectacular patterns of amber, crimson, and gold. It never failed to humble him. This reminder of how small they all were against the backdrop of cosmic grandeur. "Beautiful, isn't it?" came a voice from behind him. Jules turned to find Dr. Eliza Moreau, the station's xenobiologist, joining him at the viewport. "It is," Jules agreed simply. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, studying his reflection in the glass. "Not nervous, focused." Eliza smiled knowingly. "The Nari ambassador is bringing their chief resonance specialist, someone named Aya Invasanari. Apparently, she's the foremost expert on cross-species communication. Commander Harrow says this could be the breakthrough we've been working toward. Jules nodded absently, his attention returning to the gas giant below. Breakthrough or not, he just wanted the exchange to go smoothly so they could all return to their routines as quickly as possible. Well, get some rest, Eliza said, patting his shoulder. Tomorrow will be interesting. As Jules finally lay in his bunk that night, sleep eluded him. The station creaked and settled around him, its familiar noises usually lulling him to sleep, but tonight his mind raced with technical specifications and protocols. He wasn't worried about meeting the Nari, he told himself. He was simply being thorough. Nora knew better, but thankfully, she remained silent. Morning came too quickly. Jules awoke to the station's artificial dawn lighting and immediately began reviewing his preparation checklist. The Nari vessel was scheduled to dock at 900 hours, and Jules wanted to conduct one final diagnostic on the resonance chambers before their arrival. "Jules," Nora announced as he finished his breakfast, "Commander Harrow requests your presence in the docking bay. The Nari vessel has made contact and will be arriving 30 minutes ahead of schedule." Jules nearly choked on his synthetic coffee. "What? Why wasn't I informed of the schedule change?" "I am informing you now," Nora replied with infuriating logic. "The commander received the update 17 minutes ago and has been notifying essential personnel since then." Rushing through the station's corridors, Jules mentally reviewed the docking protocols. Everything was ready. It had to be. He'd triple-checked every system. Still, the change in timing unsettled him. Jules thrived on precision and predictability. When he arrived at the docking bay, Commander Harrow was already there with Dr. Moreau and 2 security officers. The commander, a tall woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, acknowledged Jules with a curt nod. "Engineer Wren, good. The Nari ship will be docking momentarily. Remember the protocols we discussed? No sudden movements, clear verbal communication, and most importantly, be mindful of your emotional state when speaking. The Nari ambassador is bringing their resonance specialist to begin calibrations immediately." "Yes, Commander," Jules replied, trying to project calm competence despite the knot forming in his stomach. "All systems are prepared. We can begin the resonance tests as soon as their specialist has settled in." The docking sequence began with a series of mechanical whirs and clanks as the station's arms extended to secure the approaching Nari vessel. Jules focused on the engineering display panel, monitoring pressure differentials and connection seals. This was familiar territory: physics and mechanics, numbers and systems. This, he understood. With a final metallic thunk, the docking was complete. A hiss of equalizing pressure filled the bay, and the connecting door slid open. Jules looked up from his panel, and his tools clattered to the floor. 3. Nari entered the docking bay. In the lead was clearly the ambassador, a tall, distinguished figure with deep blue iridescence rippling across his features. Behind him stood another Nari with the insignia of a security officer. But it was the third figure that had caused Jules's momentary loss of motor control. She stepped into the station's light with fluid grace, her skin shimmering with a gentle gold-green luminescence that seemed to dance across her features. Her eyes, large and expressive, took in the station with intelligent curiosity. She wore what appeared to be a formal Nari uniform, but it flowed around her form like liquid silver. "Ambassador Thelian, welcome aboard Station Atmospheric Research Facility 7. Commander Harrow stepped forward, executing the formal Nari greeting gesture perfectly. "We are honored by your presence." As the official introductions continued, Jules bent down to retrieve his dropped tools, his face burning with embarrassment. What was wrong with him? He'd seen images of the Nari before. He'd studied their physiological reports. They were an alien species, for heaven's sake. Yet something about this particular Nari, the specialist, he presumed, had caught him completely off guard. "And this is our chief engineer, Jules Wren," Commander Harrow was saying. "He will be working directly with your resonance specialist on the experimental protocols." Jules straightened up. Tools clutched awkwardly in his hands, and found himself face to face with the golden-green Nari. "This is Aya Invasa Nari, Chief Resonance Specialist of the Nari Scientific Delegation," Ambassador Thalion introduced with a formal nod. Aya extended her hand in the human manner, a gesture that had been adopted during early diplomatic exchanges. "Engineer Wren," she said, her voice melodic with an underlying harmonic quality unique to the Nari. "I have studied your station's specifications with great interest. Your adaptation of quantum field technology for atmospheric analysis is quite ingenious." Jules took her hand, noting the slightly warmer temperature of her skin. Another Nari physiological difference. "Thank you. Specialist Nari," he managed, his voice mercifully steady despite the chaos in his mind. "I look forward to our collaboration." As their hands separated, Jules couldn't help but notice how the gold-green luminescence of her skin intensified briefly at the point of contact. A reaction to human touch? Or something else? The formal introductions complete, Commander Harrow directed the delegation toward the conference room for diplomatic preliminaries. Jules fell into step beside Aya, hyper-aware of his posture, his breathing, and most of all, his thoughts. Nari couldn't read minds. That much had been established, but their sensitivity to emotional frequencies made them acutely aware of underlying feelings. "Your station maintains an impressive orbit," Aya commented as they walked. "The gravitational fluctuations from the gas giant must present unique engineering challenges." Jules relaxed slightly, grateful for the technical topic. "Yes, we've implemented a dynamic stabilization system that continuously adjusts to the planet's gravitational pull. The gas giant's mass creates a complex field that shifts depending on the position of its 27 moons." "Fascinating," Aya replied, and Jules was surprised to detect genuine interest in her tone. "On my world, we build with resonant materials that naturally adjust to gravitational changes. Perhaps there could be an exchange of techniques." As they approached the conference room, Jules found himself strangely reluctant for this initial conversation to end. It had been so long since he'd spoken to someone who understood the intricacies of his work without lengthy explanations. "She's so beautiful," Jules thought, watching as the station lights played across the iridescent qualities of her skin. Not just physically, but intellectually, the way her mind works. Then, without intending to, in the softest of whispers that he thought couldn't possibly be heard, Jules murmured, "She's so beautiful. I wonder if she'd marry me." It was a throwaway thought, the kind of absurd hyperbole that flits through human minds a dozen times a day. Jules didn't mean it literally. It was merely an expression of unexpected admiration, possibly the first stirrings of attraction. Had he been with human colleagues, no one would have heard his whisper over the ambient noise of the station. But Aya wasn't human. She stopped mid-stride, her skin flashing a brilliant gold that momentarily illuminated the corridor. Her large eyes widened further, pupils contracting to thin lines, then dilating again, the Nari equivalent of a blush. Jules would later learn. She began, then paused, clearly flustered. "That is a significant proposition. Engineer Wren, among my people, such declarations are not made lightly." Jules froze in horror as he realized what had happened. The Nari hearing range extended well beyond human capacity, and their linguistic resonance allowed them to detect the emotional intent behind even the faintest utterance. She had heard him. She had heard his ridiculous, hyperbolic, completely inappropriate whisper. "No, I didn't," Jules stammered, panic rising. "That wasn't, I wasn't actually proposing." Commander Harrow turned back, noticing the commotion. Is there a problem? Aya's skin had settled into a pulsing pattern of gold and blue, embarrassment and confusion, though Jules didn't know that yet. No problem, Commander, she said smoothly. Engineer Wren was just explaining some of the station's unique features. Quite unexpected features. Jules could only nod mutely, his face burning with mortification. Well, come along then, the commander said, gesturing them forward. We have a full agenda today. As they resumed walking, now in uncomfortable silence. Jules snuck a glance at Aya. She was looking straight ahead, her expression unreadable to his human perception, but her skin continued to shift between gold and blue, with occasional flickers of a new color, a deep, resonant purple that seemed to emanate from her core. Jules had never wanted to disappear more completely in his entire life. The diplomatic meeting proceeded with excruciating formality. Jules sat at attention, speaking only when directly addressed about technical matters, hyper-aware of Aya seated across the table. She, too, maintained professional composure. Though Jules noticed Ambassador Thalion glancing at her with what seemed like concern several times throughout the meeting. As outlined in our communication, Commander Hera was saying, the primary purpose of this exchange is to further our understanding of Nari resonance capabilities and to explore potential applications in human-Nari relations. Ambassador Thalion inclined his head. Indeed, we believe that proper calibration of emotional frequencies could prevent many of the misunderstandings that have occurred in previous diplomatic exchanges. Jules winced internally. The misunderstandings referred to included an incident where a human diplomat's sarcastic joke had been interpreted as a declaration of war, nearly ending Earth-Nari relations before they'd properly begun. Specialist Nari will work directly with your engineer to establish baseline readings. The ambassador continued. She is our foremost expert on cross-species resonance patterns. All eyes turned to Aya, whose skin had settled into a professional blue-green glow. I have prepared a series of experiments that should help us map human emotional frequencies against our own, she said, her voice steady. With Engineer Wren's assistance, we can begin calibrations this afternoon. Jules nodded stiffly when Commander Harrow looked his way. Working closely with Aya after his mortifying whisper was the last thing he wanted. But he had no choice. This project was too important to jeopardize with personal discomfort. After the meeting adjourned, Jules attempted to slip away quickly, but Aya caught up to him in the corridor. Engineer Wren, she said, her voice lower than it had been in the conference room. I believe we should discuss what happened earlier. Jules reluctantly stopped, unable to meet her gaze. Specialist Nari, I sincerely apologize for my inappropriate comment. It was unprofessional and completely out of line. I assure you, it won't happen again. Aya studied him, her head tilted slightly. Among my people, spoken intentions carry significant weight. What you whispered, even if you believed it couldn't be heard, had clear emotional resonance behind it. It was just a figure of speech, Jules insisted, finally looking up at her. Humans often exaggerate or say things they don't literally mean. It's a quirk of our communication. I'm aware of human linguistic peculiarities, Aya replied. However, the frequency of your emotional output suggested genuine sentiment, not mere hyperbole. Jules felt his face grow hot again. I admire your intellect and your... That is, I found our conversation stimulating, but I wasn't actually proposing marriage. That would be absurd. We've just met, and we're different species, and interspecies relationships are not unprecedented, Aya interrupted, then immediately looked surprised at her own words. A flash of that deep purple rippled across her skin again before she composed herself. What I mean to suggest is that your emotional resonance is quite unique. Engineer Wren, I believe it would make an excellent subject for our studies. Before Jules could respond, Nora's voice came over the station's communication system. Engineer Wren, System diagnostic required in Lab 3. Priority level, immediate. Grateful for the interruption. Jules took a step back. I should attend to that. Perhaps we can continue this discussion later. The lab will be prepared for your experiments by 1400 hours. Aya nodded, her expression still unreadable to him. Until then, Engineer Wren. As Jules hurried away, he didn't notice how Aya's gaze followed him, or how her skin shimmered with that strange purple luminescence long after he'd gone. In Lab 3, Jules found nothing requiring immediate attention. "Nora," he said to the empty room, "there's no diagnostic needed here." "Correct," the AI replied. "However, your vital signs indicated extreme distress, and your social interaction patterns suggested you required an exit strategy. I created one." Jules sank into a lab chair, running his hands through his dark hair. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I've made a complete fool of myself." Nora, the Nari specialist, heard me. She heard me wonder if she'd marry me. It was just a stupid, exaggerated thought. Now she thinks I'm proposing some kind of interspecies relationship. "Fascinating," Nora responded. "Your romantic ineptitude has now extended beyond your own species. This represents a significant expansion of your social awkwardness." "Not helpful," Jules groaned. "On the contrary, this development provides valuable data. The Nari are here to study emotional resonance. Your unexpected attraction could serve as an excellent baseline for authentic human emotional response." Jules stood up, pacing the lab. "I'm not attracted to her. I just found her intellectually stimulating and physically unique. That description aligns with common parameters of attraction," Nora pointed out. "Additionally, your physiological responses, increased heart rate, pupil dilation, elevated skin temperature, override observation commentary, code 79. Jules interrupted. "Very well. However, you have approximately 3 hours and 22 minutes to prepare the lab for the resonance experiments. I suggest focusing on work rather than your interspecies romantic crisis." Jules sighed but took the AI's advice. Throwing himself into the technical preparations was exactly what he needed. The resonance chamber required precise calibration to detect the subtle neural patterns that characterized Nari communication. By the time 1400 hours approached, Jules had the lab in perfect order and had almost managed to push the embarrassing incident from his mind. Almost. When Aya entered the lab, precisely at 1400, Jules maintained a carefully professional demeanor. "Specialist Nari, the resonance chamber is prepared according to the specifications you provided. We've adjusted the quantum field parameters to account for Nari neural patterns." Aya approached the central console, examining the readings with obvious interest. "Impressive adaptation. Engineer Wren, you've incorporated our frequency modulation techniques seamlessly." "I studied the materials you sent ahead," Jules replied, relaxing slightly as they fell into technical discussion. "The quantum entanglement approach to emotional resonance is fascinating. We've never considered applying it to communication technologies. It is the foundation of our society," Aya explained, her fingers dancing across the console with practiced ease. "From our earliest history, Nari have sensed the emotional frequencies of others. Our technology merely amplifies and clarifies what we naturally perceive." As they worked, Jules found himself growing more comfortable in Aya's presence. Her technical brilliance was undeniable, and her explanations of Nari resonance theory opened new pathways of understanding that Jules had never considered. Hours passed as they calibrated equipment and ran preliminary tests, their earlier awkwardness gradually dissolving in the face of shared intellectual curiosity. "I believe we're ready for the first controlled experiment," Aya announced finally. "We need baseline readings from both human and Nari subjects experiencing the same emotional states." Jules hesitated. "I assumed we would use recorded emotional patterns from the database." Aya's skin flickered with amber light. Amusement. Jules would later learn. Recorded patterns lack authenticity. For accurate calibration, we need real-time emotional responses. She gestured to 2 chairs positioned inside the resonance field. You and I will serve as the initial test subjects. Me? Jules asked, alarm returning. Wouldn't Commander Harrow or Dr. Moreau be better subjects? They have diplomatic training, which would make their emotional responses measured and controlled. Aya countered. Science requires authentic data. Engineer Wren, your emotional frequencies are remarkably unfiltered. Jules couldn't argue with her logic, though he suspected there was more to her choice than scientific necessity. Reluctantly, he took one of the chairs while Aya seated herself in the other. Between them hummed the resonance field generator, its soft blue glow illuminating their faces. The process is simple, Aya explained. I will introduce a series of concepts, and we will both focus our thoughts on them. The resonance field will map our emotional responses and create a comparative analysis. Will you be able to hear my thoughts? Jules asked nervously. No, Aya assured him. The technology detects emotional frequencies, not specific thoughts. I will perceive the intensity and quality of your emotional response, but not its content. Somehow, this wasn't entirely reassuring. Let us begin with something neutral, Aya suggested. Please focus on the concept of water. Jules closed his eyes, thinking of water, the ocean on Earth, the recycled water systems of the station, the molecular structure of H2O. Simple, neutral, scientific. Interesting, Aya murmured. Your emotional response includes traces of longing and nostalgia. You miss Earth's oceans. Jules opened his eyes in surprise. Yes, I do. My family lived near the Pacific. How could you tell that specifically? The resonance pattern has a distinctive signature associated with memory-linked emotion, Aya explained. Let's try another. Focus on music. Again, Jules closed his eyes, thinking of his favorite classical compositions, the complex mathematical patterns underlying harmony, the concert halls of his youth. Joy, Aya observed. Intellectual appreciation, mathematical recognition. You see music as both art and science. Jules nodded, increasingly impressed. Your ability to interpret these patterns is remarkable. It is my life's work, Aya replied simply. Now, let us try something more complex. Focus on home. This concept brought a flood of conflicting emotions to Jules. His childhood home on Earth, now transformed by climate-adaptive architecture. The sterile quarters of previous space assignments. His current cabin on the station, small but personalized. The loneliness of space contrasted with the peace of solitude. Complex indeed, Aya said softly. Comfort and discomfort, belonging and alienation. You are a person caught between worlds. Engineer Wren. Jules shifted uncomfortably. This is becoming rather personal. Emotional resonance is inherently personal, Aya pointed out. One more concept, if you will. Focus on connection. Jules hesitated, then closed his eyes. Connection. Human connection had always been difficult for him. He thought of his few friendships, most now maintained through sporadic messages across vast distances, professional connections, collaborative but limited, his failed romantic relationships, each ending when partners grew frustrated with his emotional reticence or obsessive work habits. The unexpected connection he'd felt earlier that day, speaking with Aya about resonance theory. When he opened his eyes, he found Aya staring at him, her skin pulsing with that deep purple luminescence he'd noticed earlier. Your resonance pattern on this concept is remarkable, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. There is longing, fear, hope, and something else. Something I cannot quite translate into human terms. Before Jules could respond, the lab door slid open, and Commander Harrow entered with Ambassador Thelian. "How are the experiments progressing?" the commander asked, her gaze moving between Jules and Aya with sharp assessment. Jules quickly stood, grateful for the interruption. "We've established baseline readings and conducted preliminary resonance mapping. Specialist Nari's technology is performing exceptionally well." Ambassador Thelian was studying Aya, his attention clearly drawn to the purple luminescence that still lingered on her skin. He said something in the Nari language, a flowing series of harmonics that the translation technology couldn't quite capture. Aya responded in kind, her skin shifting to a more neutral blue as she spoke. The exchange continued briefly before the ambassador turned to Commander Harrow. "It seems our specialists are making excellent progress," he said smoothly. "However, I must request Specialist Nari's presence for a diplomatic consultation. Perhaps Engineer Wren could continue the calibrations independently for now." "Of course," Commander Harrow agreed. "Engineer Wren, prepare the data for review at tomorrow's briefing." As Aya left with the ambassador, she glanced back at Jules with an expression he couldn't interpret. The purple glow had faded entirely, replaced by a professional blue-green. But something in her eyes suggested their conversation wasn't finished. Left alone in the lab, Jules began organizing the data they'd collected. The resonance patterns were fascinating, clear visual representations of emotional states mapped across neural pathways. He could see the differences between his human responses and Aya's Nari patterns, but also striking similarities in core emotional structures. "Nora," he said to the station AI, "analyze these resonance patterns against known human emotional responses. What's this unusual signature that appears in both my readings and Specialist Nari's during the connection prompt?" After a moment of processing, Nora replied, "The pattern contains elements consistent with what humans categorize as attraction, curiosity, and recognition. In simple terms, Engineer Wren, you appear to be experiencing mutual interest with the alien specialist." Jules frowned at the display. "That's impossible. We're different species with entirely different neurobiological structures." "Incorrect," Nora countered. "The Nari neurological system shares significant structural similarities with human systems, particularly in limbic equivalent regions. The diplomatic briefing you ignored last month covered this extensively." Before Jules could respond, his personal communication device chimed with a message. It was from Aya, sent through the station's internal system. "Engineer Wren, our discussion was interrupted. Perhaps we could continue over the evening meal. The resonance data requires further interpretation. 1900 hours in the station dining facility? Specialist A.I.N. Jules stared at the message, his heart rate increasing in a way that would have given Nora ample material for unwanted commentary. A professional dinner to discuss research results. Nothing more, certainly not a date. Yet, as he sent his affirmative reply, Jules couldn't help but wonder what the ambassador had said to Aya in their private Nari exchange, and why her skin had glowed that remarkable purple when their emotional frequencies had aligned. Word traveled quickly on a small research station. By the time Jules arrived at the dining facility at precisely 1900 hours, he was acutely aware of the speculative glances from the other station personnel. Dr. Moreau gave him a not-so-subtle thumbs-up as he passed her table, while Security Officer Tanner actually winked. "Your social isolation appears to be ending," Nora commented through his personal communicator. "Station communication channels contain 17 mentions of your dinner with Specialist Nari, including 3 wagers on potential romantic outcomes." "Mute AI assistant," Jules muttered as he spotted Aya at a corner table. She was examining the synthesized food options with obvious curiosity, her skin shimmering with a gentle gold that caught the light. "Engineer Wren," she greeted him as he approached. "Thank you for joining me. I've been exploring your Earth cuisine options. The molecular structures are fascinating, though quite different from Nari nutrition." Jules took the seat across from her, grateful for the neutral opening topic. The synthesizer can only approximate real Earth food. It's one of the compromises of long-term space assignments. We have similar technology, Aya replied, selecting what appeared to be a vegetable stir-fry. Though we focus more on nutritional resonance than flavor replication. As they began to eat, Jules found himself relaxing into the conversation. Aya was curious about Earth's culinary traditions, and Jules discovered he enjoyed explaining the cultural significance of different foods. It was easy to forget, in these moments, that they were from different worlds, literally. I reviewed our resonance data after our session, Aya said eventually, steering the conversation back to their research. The alignment patterns were unexpected. Jules nodded, keeping his tone professional. I noticed that as well. Certain emotional frequencies showed remarkable cross-species similarities, particularly the connection response. Aya agreed, her skin flickering briefly with that now familiar purple. In Nari culture, such resonance alignment is significant. Jules set down his fork. What did Ambassador Thalion say to you after he saw the readings? Aya's gaze dropped to her plate. He reminded me of diplomatic protocols regarding personal connections during official exchanges. Nari representatives are expected to maintain emotional neutrality to prevent misunderstanding. Like my whispered comment, Jules said quietly. Yes. Aya looked up, meeting his eyes directly. Engineer Wren, Jules, I must ask you directly. Was your whispered statement merely human hyperbole, or did it contain genuine emotional resonance? The directness of her question caught Jules off guard. In human interaction, such matters were approached obliquely, with layers of social buffering. The Nari, it seemed, valued emotional honesty above social comfort. Jules began, then paused, considering his words carefully. It wasn't a literal proposal. We had just met, but the feeling behind it was genuine. I felt an unexpected connection with you, intellectually and otherwise. Aya's skin brightened with gold and purple swirls. Thank you for your honesty. Among my people, such resonance alignment is rare. Even between Nari, to experience it with a human is unprecedented. What does it mean? Jules asked. Scientifically speaking, he added hastily. Scientifically speaking, Aya echoed, a hint of amusement in her tone. It suggests that emotional connection transcends species boundaries. The fundamental frequencies of attraction, interest, and recognition appear universal rather than species-specific. An important discovery for our research, Jules noted. Indeed. Aya tilted her head slightly. But there is also a personal dimension to consider. In Nari culture, individuals who experience resonance alignment often form deep bonds, partnerships that can be romantic, intellectual, or both. Jules felt his pulse quicken. And in cases of cross-species alignment, what does your culture dictate then? There is no precedent, Aya admitted, which means we would be establishing the protocol ourselves. The implications hung between them, neither willing to articulate them fully. Around them, the dining facility hummed with activity, other crew members casting curious glances their way. Perhaps, Jules suggested carefully, we should document this phenomenon thoroughly, for scientific purposes. A wise approach. Aya agreed, her skin now glowing with a steady purple-gold pattern that Jules was beginning to associate with her particular emotional state around him. Additional resonance testing would be valuable. As they finished their meal and discussed the next day's research plans, Jules became aware of a subtle shift in their interaction. The initial awkwardness had transformed into something else, a mutual acknowledgement of the unusual connection between them, carefully framed within professional boundaries but unmistakably personal in nature. When they parted at the dining facility entrance, Aya performed the formal Nari farewell gesture, but added a slight variation that Jules didn't recognize. "What does that mean?" he asked, mimicking the modified hand movement. "It is a gesture reserved for those with whom one shares resonance," she explained. "It translates roughly to, until our frequencies align again." As Jules walked back to his quarters, he found himself smiling for the first time in longer than he could remember. Whatever was happening between him and Aya defied conventional categorization, but it felt like the beginning of something significant. "Nora," he said as his cabin door closed behind him, "what do we know about Nari partnership customs?" "Accessing cultural database," the AI replied. "Nari partnerships are based on resonance compatibility rather than biological reproduction considerations. While reproductive pairing exists within the species, long-term bonds are primarily determined by emotional and intellectual resonance patterns. Cross-species bonds are theoretically possible but unprecedented in documented history." "Theoretically possible," Jules repeated softly. "I note a 37% increase in your dopamine levels." "Engineer Wren," Nora observed. "Shall I update your psychological profile to include xenophilic tendencies?" Jules threw a pillow at the nearest speaker. "Override commentary, code 79. "Very well. However, I feel compelled to point out that your interest in Nari partnership customs suggests a trajectory beyond professional collaboration. Station betting pools now favor a romantic development within 3 Earth days. The entire station is speculating about this." Jules groaned. "Affirmative. Isolated research posts with limited personnel typically develop intense interest in social dynamics. Your unexpected connection with specialist Nari provides optimal entertainment value." Jules collapsed onto his bunk, arm thrown over his eyes. "Wonderful. Now I'm the station's reality entertainment." "If it helps," Nora added. "Dr. Moreau has been quite supportive, suggesting that cross-cultural understanding begins with personal connections." It didn't help, but Jules appreciated the attempt at consolation. As he prepared for sleep, his thoughts kept returning to Aya, the remarkable intelligence behind her large eyes, the fascinating shifts of color across her skin, the way her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate within his own chest. "This is absurd," he told himself firmly. "We've known each other for less than a day." Yet, something about their connection felt like recognition rather than discovery, as if they were remembering each other rather than meeting for the first time. Jules had never believed in concepts like destiny or soulmates, but the resonance patterns didn't lie. There was something scientifically measurable in their interaction that defied conventional explanation. The next 3 days fell into a pattern. Mornings were dedicated to formal research, with the full diplomatic teams present. Jules and Aya conducted resonance experiments with various human and Nari subjects, documenting the similarities and differences in emotional response patterns. The data was groundbreaking, suggesting possibilities for enhanced cross-species communication protocols. Afternoons found them working alone in the lab, refining their methods and discussing theoretical applications. These sessions inevitably drifted from purely professional topics to more personal exchanges. Jules learned about Aya's homeworld, a planet with 3 moons and vast crystalline forests that amplified natural resonance fields. He told her about Earth's oceans and mountains, the crowded cities he'd avoided, and the quiet natural spaces he missed. Evenings they spent together in the dining facility or the observation deck, ostensibly reviewing research but increasingly engaged in the simple pleasure of each other's company. Aya taught Jules the basics of the Nari language, with its complex harmonic overtones, while he introduced her to earth music, which she found mathematically intriguing but emotionally simplistic. Through it all, the station personnel watched with undisguised interest. Dr. Moreau had taken to giving Jules unsolicited relationship advice, while Commander Harrow maintained professional distance but seemed amused by the development. Even Ambassador Thalion had relaxed his initial concerns, noting that the personal connection was producing exceptional research results. On the 4th day, everything changed. "The Nari Central Council has requested a formal demonstration of our findings," Ambassador Thelian announced during the morning briefing. They are sending Observer Herone to evaluate the potential for expanded research collaboration. Commander Harrow nodded approvingly. This is excellent news. When can we expect Observer Herone's arrival? Tomorrow, the ambassador replied. The observer was already en route to a nearby system when our preliminary reports were transmitted. They are particularly interested in the unexpected resonance alignment between Specialist Nari and Engineer Wren. All eyes turned to Jules and Aya, who sat side by side at the conference table. Jules felt his face flush as Aya's skin rippled with gold. Embarrassment shared across species boundaries. Observer Herone will require a formal demonstration of this alignment. Ambassador Thelian continued. Such cross-species resonance has significant implications for our diplomatic protocols. After the meeting, Jules pulled Aya aside in the corridor. What does this mean? Being observed by this Herone person? Aya's skin had taken on a worried blue tinge. Observer Herone represents the highest level of Nari scientific authority. They will expect us to demonstrate our resonance alignment under controlled conditions, like the tests we've been running. More intensive, Aya explained. Observers are empowered to request deep resonance synchronization, a process that requires complete emotional transparency from both participants. Jules frowned. Complete transparency? You mean they'll know everything I'm feeling? Not specific thoughts, but yes, the full spectrum of your emotional responses would be mapped and analyzed. Aya hesitated. Including your feelings toward me, and mine toward you. The implications were clear. Whatever had been developing between them, carefully contained within professional boundaries, deniable if necessary, would be exposed to official scrutiny. Their private connection would become public record. Do we have a choice? Jules asked quietly. We could refuse, Aya said. But it would end the research collaboration and potentially damage human-Nari relations. The observer's approval is necessary for continued cooperation. Jules ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Aya had come to recognize as indicating stress. So either we expose our personal, whatever this is, to official examination, or we jeopardize interspecies diplomacy. I'm afraid so. Aya's skin darkened to a deep blue. I would understand if you chose to withdraw from the demonstration. Another human subject could be substituted, though the resonance alignment would not be as pronounced. The thought of Aya demonstrating resonance alignment with someone else sent an unexpected surge of jealousy through Jules. The feeling surprised him with its intensity. No, he said firmly. We've come this far together. We'll face the observer together. Aya's skin flashed briefly with brilliant purple. Thank you, Jules. This means a great deal to me. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for the observer's arrival, reviewing their data and refining the resonance chamber's calibrations. Jules tried not to think about the personal implications of tomorrow's demonstration, focusing instead on the technical aspects of their work. But as evening approached, his anxiety grew. Your cortisol levels suggest extreme stress, Nora commented as Jules paced his quarters that night. Would you like me to dispense a mild sedative? No thanks, Jules replied, continuing his pacing. I need to think clearly tomorrow. May I offer an observation, Engineer Wren? Jules sighed. Go ahead, Nora. In the 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days you have been stationed here, I have never recorded such consistent elevation in your oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin levels as in the past 4 days. By all measurable parameters, your interaction with Specialist Nari has significantly improved your psychological well-being. Jules stopped pacing. Your point being? Simply that regardless of tomorrow's outcome, this connection appears beneficial. Perhaps focusing on that fact would reduce your current anxiety. It was surprisingly good advice from an AI programmed role, primarily for station management. Thank you, Nora, Jules said sincerely. You're welcome. And if I may add a personal note, the betting pool now heavily favors a formal relationship declaration following tomorrow's demonstration. Dr. Moreau stands to win considerable synthetic coffee rations. Jules couldn't help but laugh. Good night, Nora. Observer Herone arrived with the efficiency and formality typical of high-ranking Nari officials. Tall and imposing, with skin that maintained a constant silver-white luminescence that indicated perfect emotional control. Herone inspected the station's facilities with silent assessment before turning attention to the resonance chamber. "This is where you documented the cross-species alignment?" they asked, the translation system barely keeping up with the complex harmonics of their speech. "Yes, observer," Aya replied respectfully. "Engineer Wren and I have mapped extensive resonance patterns demonstrating remarkable cross-species compatibility." Herone's large eyes fixed on Jules with unsettling intensity. "And you, human, you consent to deep resonance synchronization for official evaluation." Jules straightened his posture, meeting the observer's gaze steadily. "I do." "Very well." Herone gestured to the resonance chamber. "You will both enter the field and establish synchronization. I will observe and record the patterns for the Central Council's assessment." As Jules and Aya took their positions within the chamber, he noticed her skin fluctuating between professional blue and nervous gold. He wanted to offer reassurance, but was acutely aware of Herone's scrutiny. "Begin with basic alignment," Herone instructed. "Progress to deep synchronization when ready." Aya activated the resonance field, the familiar blue glow enveloping them both. "Focus on neutral concepts first," she murmured to Jules. "Allow your mind to settle before we attempt deeper connection." They moved through the now familiar process, focusing on simple concepts, water, light, sound, as the field mapped their emotional responses. Jules could see the patterns forming on the monitoring display, his human responses aligning with Aya's Nari patterns with increasing precision. "Proceed to personal concepts," Herone directed after several minutes. Aya's eyes met Jules's briefly. "Focus on connection," she suggested softly. Jules closed his eyes and let his mind embrace the concept fully. No longer attempting to maintain professional distance, he allowed himself to acknowledge the depth of his feelings for Aya, the intellectual admiration, the surprising attraction, the sense of recognition that defied rational explanation. The resonance field flared with brilliant light, the patterns on the display shifting into perfect synchronization. Jules heard gasps from the observing personnel and opened his eyes to find Aya's skin glowing with the most intense purple he had yet seen, pulsing in time with his own heartbeat. "Remarkable," Herone murmured, their professional detachment slipping for the first time. "The alignment exceeds all previous cross-species records." "Progress to deep synchronization," Ambassador Thelian urged, clearly pleased with the demonstration. Aya reached across the space between their chairs, extending her hand, palm up. "Deep synchronization requires physical contact," she explained, her voice gentle, "and complete emotional openness." Jules hesitated only briefly before placing his hand in hers. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The resonance field intensified around them, and Jules felt as if barriers within his mind were dissolving. Not his thoughts, those remained private, but the emotional walls he'd constructed over years of isolation seemed to melt away. Through their connected hands, he sensed Aya's emotions with startling clarity. Her scientific curiosity, her diplomatic caution, and underlying it all, a profound personal interest in him that mirrored his own feelings for her. The resonance patterns on the display showed their emotional frequencies merging into a single, harmonious signal that pulsed with shared rhythm. "This confirms the theoretical models," Herone announced, their voice distant to Jules's perception as he remained immersed in the connection with Aya. "Emotional resonance transcends species boundaries when compatibility exists. The implications for diplomacy are significant." The deep synchronization lasted only minutes, but to Jules, It felt like both an instant and an eternity. When Aya finally withdrew her hand and the field powered down, he felt strangely bereft, as if a part of himself had been disconnected. "The Central Council will be most interested in these findings," Hironi stated, their professional demeanor fully restored. "I will recommend expanded research initiatives and the development of new diplomatic protocols to account for cross-species resonance potential." As the official proceedings continued around them, Jules and Aya remained seated in the chamber, their eyes locked in silent communication. Something fundamental had changed between them, a boundary crossed that could not be uncrossed. The days that followed brought a flurry of diplomatic activity. Observer Hironi's report to the Nari Central Council resulted in immediate approval for expanded research collaboration. New teams of scientists were scheduled to arrive within weeks, and Commander Harrow was busy preparing the station for increased personnel. Amid the official bustle, Jules and Aya found themselves at a personal crossroads. The deep synchronization had exposed feelings that could no longer be ignored or disguised as merely professional interest. "The Nari delegation will depart tomorrow to prepare for the expanded research initiative," Aya told Jules as they stood together on the observation deck, watching the gas giant's swirling storms below. "I am expected to return with them." Jules nodded, his heart heavy. "I understand. You have responsibilities to your people, as do you to yours," Aya replied, her skin a melancholy blue. But Observer Hironi's report included a recommendation that I did not anticipate. "What recommendation?" "That our resonance alignment be preserved for continuing study." Aya turned to face him fully. "The Observer has suggested that you be assigned as Earth's representative to the Nari homeworld for the next phase of research." Jules stared at her in shock. "Me? On the Nari homeworld?" "If you were willing," Aya said carefully, her skin beginning to glow with hopeful purple. "It would be a 6-month assignment initially, with potential for extension." The possibility unfolded in Jules's mind. 6 months on an alien world, continuing their research together, exploring the connection that had formed so unexpectedly between them. "What about diplomatic protocols?" he asked. "The restrictions on personal relationships during official exchanges." Observer Hironi's report specifically addresses this, Aya explained. "Our resonance alignment is now classified as a scientific phenomenon of diplomatic significance. Any personal relationship that develops would be considered part of the research parameters." Jules couldn't help but laugh. "So our relationship would be officially sanctioned for scientific purposes." "Precisely." Aya's skin shimmered with gold and purple. "The Observer found our synchronization too valuable to disrupt with arbitrary restrictions." The implications were both amusing and profound. Their personal connection had become a matter of interspecies diplomatic importance. "And what about you?" Jules asked more seriously. "What do you want, beyond the scientific value of our resonance alignment?" Aya moved closer, her large eyes reflecting the stars visible through the viewport. "I want to continue discovering the frequencies that exist between us. Jules Wren, both scientifically and personally." Jules reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The now familiar sensation of connection flowed between them. No resonance chamber needed to amplify what had become natural. "Then I accept the assignment," he said simply. That evening, they shared a quiet dinner away from the curious eyes of the station personnel. Tomorrow would bring official announcements and preparations, but tonight belonged to them alone. "I've been meaning to ask," Jules said as they finished their meal. "The purple luminescence your skin displays around me, what does it signify in Nari emotional language?" Aya's skin immediately glowed with the color in question. "It is a frequency associated with deep recognition and potential bonding. It is rare even among Nari, appearing only when resonance alignment is particularly strong." So, essentially, you've been walking around the station wearing the Nari equivalent of a flashing sign saying, "I really like this human," Jules teased. Essentially, Aya admitted, her skin adding flickers of gold embarrassment to the purple. Though only other Nari would recognize the significance. Ambassador Thalion noticed immediately, which prompted his initial concerns. And now? Now the ambassador has formally approved our continued collaboration, both professional and personal. Aya's expression grew more serious. Jules, there is something I must ask you before we proceed further. That first day, when you whispered those words, "She's so beautiful. I wonder if she'd marry me," Jules quoted, no longer embarrassed by the memory. Yes, among my people. Such declarations, even whispered, carry the weight of formal intent. I have explained to you that it was a misunderstanding, but I must know, now that we have established this connection between us. Do you regret those words? Jules considered the question carefully. What had begun as an embarrassing slip now seemed almost prophetic. I don't regret them, he said finally. I didn't mean them literally at the time, but now I can imagine a future where they might become true intent. Aya's skin glowed with the brightest purple he had yet seen. Then I will consider your whisper an advanced declaration, to be formally addressed when the time is right. 6 months later. Jules stood in the crystalline forest of the Nari homeworld, watching as the triple moons rose above the iridescent trees. Beside him, Aya's skin shimmered with familiar purple as they completed their daily resonance measurements. Their research had progressed beyond all expectations. The cross-species resonance protocols they had developed were being implemented in diplomatic exchanges throughout known space, creating new pathways for understanding between different sentient species. But more important than the scientific achievements was the personal journey they had undertaken together. Learning each other's languages, both spoken and unspoken, navigating cultural differences with patience and humor, building a relationship that existed in the space between their worlds, defined not by human or Nari traditions, but by the unique connection they shared. The final measurements confirm it, Aya said, reviewing the data on her device. Our resonance alignment has strengthened by 37% since our arrival here. The forest's natural amplification field appears to enhance cross-species compatibility. Is that your scientific assessment, Specialist Nari? Jules asked with a smile. It is. Engineer Wren, she replied formally, then let her professional demeanor dissolve into warm affection. Though I suspect factors beyond measurable resonance may be contributing to our increased compatibility. Jules took her hand, feeling the now familiar connection flow between them. Such as? Such as the human emotion you call love, Aya suggested, her skin glowing with deep, steady purple. A concept I have come to understand quite thoroughly through our research. A very thorough understanding indeed. Jules agreed, drawing her closer. As the moons cast their light through the crystal branches above, Jules thought back to that first day on the station, and the whispered words that had set everything in motion. She's so beautiful, he said softly, no longer a whisper but a clear declaration. I wonder if she'd marry me. Aya's skin pulsed with joyful light as she replied, I already agreed.